They were once hailed as the defiant voices of a generation, screaming on behalf of those who felt unseen. But when the lights dimmed, many collapsed quietly, carrying secrets they never revealed. The icons of masculinity, adored by millions of women. Some of them described themselves as gay in spirit, golden voices that seemed perfect, yet were shadowed their entire lives by rumors of unconventional love. And in some cases, only after death did unfinished diaries surface, exposing a private life that clashed with their public image. This is not just a story of fame and young death. It is a journey into the shadows, where sexuality, secrecy, and rumor became inseparable from the tragedy of grunge. The question is, did we ever truly know who they were? Or have we only ever seen half the truth? Stay with me as we uncover 10 familiar names and the secrets they never fully told. Kurt Cobain, the masculine icon who called himself gay in spirit. He was the face of a generation's eruption. His guitar turned rage into poetry, his weary eyes glowing with rebellion. To the public, Kurt Cobain was the fragile masculine symbol of the 1990s, an anti-hero in a cardigan, singing of pain and despair. But in the journals found after his death, Kurt wrote a line that stunned many. "I am gay in spirit, and I probably could be bisexual." Kurt's childhood in Aberdeen, Washington, was never peaceful. After his parents divorced, the boy drifted from one home to another. He often said he felt abandoned, an outsider in his own family. In that loneliness, he found refuge in two places: music and friends who lived outside society's norms. He frequented gay bars in Seattle, not necessarily for sex, but to feel accepted. Friends recalled that as a teenager, Kurt even tried living as a gay man, partly as rebellion against the hypocrisy and homophobia that ruled his small hometown. When Nirvana broke through with Nevermind in 1991, everything changed. Cobain, once an outcast, became a global idol. His image was everywhere, on magazine covers, on MTV, adored by millions of young women. Yet at that very height, Kurt openly voiced his support for the LGBT community. He scrawled "God is gay" on a wall in Aberdeen, wore a homosexual t-shirt on stage, and in a 1993 interview with The Advocate, he admitted, "If I wouldn't have found Courtney, I probably would have carried on with a bisexual lifestyle." This created a paradox. In the eyes of the public, he was a masculine icon. In private, he confessed his longing to break every boundary of gender and sexuality. His candor made him one of the very few rock stars of the 1990s willing to confront prejudice and say out loud what many others kept hidden. Kurt often used ambiguity about sexuality as a kind of artistic weapon. In his lyrics, he left hints of love that knew no labels. In life, he expressed admiration for other men without hesitation. Buzz Osborne of the Melvins recalled that Kurt often joked about his sexuality, never showing shame. Yet behind the spotlight, the contradictions deepened his loneliness. In his journals, he admitted, "I'm not gay, although I wish I were, just to piss off homophobes." That was Kurt, defiant, yearning, and troubled, a lost soul searching for belonging, even in the way he loved. On April 5th, 1994, Kurt ended his life in his Seattle home. He was 27 years old. He left behind immortal music and pages of journals filled with questions about sexuality, love, and pain. Perhaps that was the final paradox of Kurt Cobain, a masculine idol worshipped around the world, yet a man who called himself gay in spirit. And he wasn't the only grunge legend to carry such secrets. Even a golden voice like Chris Cornell lived under the weight of rumors that no one has ever fully explained. Chris Cornell, the golden voice, and the rumors that never faded. He was known as the golden voice of grunge. When Chris Cornell sang Black Hole Sun, millions fell silent. His voice could be tender or thunderous, soaring like a storm or whispering like a confession. To the public, Cornell was the image of strength and artistic masculinity. A man with a sculpted body, long waves of hair, and deep piercing eyes. Yet behind that perfect image lingered whispers, rumors about his private life that followed him throughout his career, questions about his sexuality that Cornell never addressed. Born in 1964 in Seattle, Cornell grew up in a strict Catholic household. He often described his childhood as a battle with depression and loneliness. Music came as his lifeline. With Soundgarden, he helped define the heavy, brooding sound of the 1990s. Dark, intense, but lifted by a voice that seemed almost otherworldly. While Nirvana stood for rebellion and Alice in Chains embodied darkness, Soundgarden, with Cornell at the front, was raw power. That image of strength made it hard for many to imagine he might have lived with another hidden side. But in the 2000s, as Cornell launched his solo career and later joined Audioslave, strange rumors surfaced across rock forums. Some fans whispered about close relationships with male musicians. Others spoke of friendships that seemed too intimate. On Reddit, discussions pointed to backstage photos where Cornell appeared comfortable embracing, kissing on the cheek, or holding male colleagues in ways some interpreted as unusually affectionate. Cornell himself never confirmed any of this. In interviews, he stayed private, steering away from personal matters. Yet in his lyrics, he often left behind ambiguous lines. Take Like a Stone, for example. Some listeners heard it as a spiritual prayer, while others believed it was a cry for love that transcended human boundaries. For Cornell, that ambiguity seemed natural. He lived between two worlds, one as the devoted husband and father, the traditional rock star image, and the other as a sensitive soul, searching for connection without labels. Old friends later recalled that he had youthful experiences that never had a name. But Cornell chose silence, letting the public see only one side. When he died in 2017, found unexpectedly in a Detroit hotel room, the shock was immense. People debated depression, prescription drugs, and the loneliness of stardom. But in online forums, the old questions returned. Beneath the spotlight, had Chris Cornell lived a parallel life, with secret loves never made public? He will always be remembered as a voice no one could replace. Yet his silence about his private life made him one of the most mysterious figures in grunge. A man who could appear on stage like thunder, but fade backstage like a shadow. And if Cornell left us with questions unanswered, Layne Staley, the sorrowful voice of Alice in Chains, left behind a very different story, where rebellion, love, and rumors of sexuality became entangled in his tragic final days. Layne Staley, a broken love, and the whispers about his sexuality. He was once called the most heartbreaking voice of Seattle. When Layne Staley sang Rooster or Down in a Hole, listeners felt as if their own souls were being torn apart. On stage, Layne was fragile, yet fierce, a tragic emblem of grunge. And beyond the heroin addiction that defined his decline, there were rumors that never disappeared, speculations about his sexuality that he never publicly addressed. Born in 1967, Layne grew up in a broken home. Music became his escape. With Alice in Chains, he brought haunting songs of pain and shadow. While Nirvana erupted in rebellion and Soundgarden projected power, Alice in Chains became the embodiment of darkness, with Layne as its soul. But with that image came questions. Layne wasn't afraid to wear makeup, dresses, or jewelry on stage. On Reddit, one fan wrote, he didn't give a damn what people thought. He wore makeup, dresses, jewelry, and too many guys assumed he must be gay. He was once engaged to Demry Parrott, the great love of his life, but their relationship was scarred by addiction. When Demry died, Layne collapsed emotionally, and in that darkness, the rumors about his private life only grew louder. Still, Layne never confirmed anything. In one interview, he simply said, "I'm not here to fit anyone's idea of what a man should be. I'm just me." A brief statement, but one that convinced many he was always keeping part of himself hidden. On April 5th, 2002, exactly 8 years after Kurt Cobain's death, Layne was found in his Seattle apartment, alone, emaciated almost beyond recognition. He left behind a voice that can never be forgotten, and questions that were never answered. Was Layne simply a victim of addiction? Or was he also a man whose love life was never truly revealed? If Layne chose silence, the next figure was his opposite, Courtney Love, the woman of scandals, who openly spoke of her same-sex relationships and left the world of grunge both fascinated and unsettled. Courtney Love, the scandal queen, who openly embraced same-sex love. If Kurt Cobain was the fragile soul of grunge, then Courtney Love was the fire that burned through it. With torn lace dresses, smudged lipstick, and shocking interviews, she became the fiercest feminine icon of the 1990s. To the public, she was remembered as the widow of grunge, the woman who stood in the center of every storm. But what few recall is that Courtney openly acknowledged her same-sex relationships, making her one of the very few grunge figures willing to be candid about sexuality. Born in 1964 in California, Courtney grew up in chaos, drifting between the United States, New Zealand, and England. When she formed Hole in 1989, she quickly stood out with her raw sound and volatile stage presence. Yet more than music, it was her personal life that drew headlines. In interviews, she admitted to romantic relationships with women. The name most often linked to her was Kat Bjelland, leader of Babes in Toyland. Their bond was described as part love, part rivalry, an intense mixture of personal affection and artistic competition. Courtney never denied it. She once declared bluntly, "Yes, I've slept with women. Who hasn't?" That biting, provocative statement exploded across the press. At a time when many male rockers dodged even the slightest speculation about sexuality, Courtney turned it into a weapon, making her bisexuality part of her public identity. Of course, the story didn't stop there. Her marriage to Kurt Cobain placed her at the center of love and hatred alike. Some blamed her for Kurt's suffering. Others saw her as another victim. Amid the storm, her same-sex relationships were often overshadowed, but never forgotten. In her diaries, Courtney once wrote of an unnamed female lover, describing her in passionate language very different from the way she spoke of men. That frankness turned Courtney into a paradox. She was labeled the scandal queen, yet also stood as a pioneer, one of the first in grunge to say out loud that love needed no boundaries. If Kurt and Layne left us with unanswered rumors, Courtney didn't hide. She lived it, she exploded with it, and she left a mark that cannot be erased. But the story of grunge isn't only about those who revealed everything. It also carries the dreamers, like Andrew Wood, a man who wrapped himself in glam rock color, whispered about same-sex romances, and left the world far too soon, with a legacy unlike any other. Andrew Wood, a glamorous dream in the dark world of grunge. If Courtney Love chose to live in scandal, Andrew Wood was the dreamer in a bleak landscape. While most Seattle rockers wore flannel and bowed, their heads beneath heavy guitars, Andrew stood radiant. Tight pants, colorful scarves, bold makeup, and a smile that seemed to belong on a 1970s glam rock stage. He was the soul of Mother Love Bone, the band that would ultimately pave the way for Pearl Jam. Born in 1966 in Washington, Andrew was deeply influenced by David Bowie, Elton John, and Freddie Mercury, artists unafraid of blurring gender lines. Like them, he experimented freely. On stage, Andrew wore makeup, moved with flamboyance, and sometimes kissed male bandmates in front of the crowd. In a scene that valued grit and roughness, his style fascinated some and fueled rumors for others. Friends later said Andrew had relationships with both men and women, though he never confirmed it himself. For Andrew, love was simply love. By the late 1980s, Mother Love Bone was considered one of Seattle's most promising bands. Their album, Apple, was expected to launch them to the top. But just days before its release, Andrew died of a heroin overdose at the age of 24. His death ended a dream, but also set in motion something new. The surviving members went on to form Pearl Jam, forever altering the landscape of grunge. Andrew Wood left behind an image of contradiction. In a dark, brooding world, he chose to shine brightly. In a scene full of prejudice, he was comfortable with ambiguity. Was that his true self? Or simply a stage persona? The question lingers more than 3 decades later, like the radiant smile he carried with him to the grave. And if Andrew embodied the colorful dream, the next figure, Mia Zapata, brought a chilling story. A vibrant young singer, gone in a single summer night to a brutal death, leaving behind whispers as unsettling as they were tragic. Mia Zapata, the murdered singer and the untold secrets. Mia Zapata was once seen as the soul of the Gits, a punk grunge band with a raw street spirit, hungry for freedom and justice. On stage, she screamed with fury. Off stage, friends remembered her as gentle, quick to laugh, and unafraid to live honestly with her emotions. That contrast made her death in 1993 one of Seattle's most haunting scars. Born in 1965 in Kentucky, Mia grew up in a middle-class family, studying music from an early age and showing a fierce individuality. When she moved to Seattle, she quickly found her place in the underground community, forming the Gits and earning praise for a voice that was both rough and deeply soulful. But her private life remained largely hidden. Some friends said she had relationships with both men and women, that her shadowed romances gave her music its unique edge, both sensitive and rebellious. Though she never confirmed it, those rumors lingered long after her death. On the night of July 7th, 1993, Mia left a bar in Seattle and never returned. The next morning, her body was found on the street, beaten, raped, and murdered. The case shocked the city, but it took more than a decade before her killer was caught through DNA testing. For years, theories circulated. Some believed she had been targeted because of her private life. Others thought it was a random act of violence. Mia died at the age of 27, leaving behind a movement called Home Alive, founded by friends to teach self-defense classes for women, and countless unanswered questions about the private life she never revealed. If Mia's death was the bloody wound that split Seattle, then Kristen Pfaff, also 27, also lost in solitude, left behind unfinished diary pages and a suitcase that was never closed. Kristen Pfaff, the unpacked suitcase, the unfinished journal, and a hidden life. Kristen Pfaff is not a name many in the public remember, but in Seattle's community, she once shone brightly. As the bassist of Hole, Kristen stood alongside Courtney Love just as the band reached its greatest fame, immediately after Kurt Cobain's death. But only months later, she became another member of the 27 Club, leaving behind a mysterious death and pages of a journal never finished. Born in 1967 in Buffalo, New York, Kristen was classically trained in music, but found herself drawn to alternative rock. When she joined Hole in 1993, she quickly caught attention with her striking beauty and solid bass lines. In a scene dominated by men, Kristen brought something different: intelligence, sensitivity, and strength. Yet offstage, Kristen was private. Friends later shared that during her college years, she had been romantically involved with women and often wrote about those experiences in her journals. After her death, scattered entries were found, revealing loneliness, questions of identity, and desires never spoken aloud. Rumors about Kristen's same-sex relationships have persisted, though they were never publicly confirmed. On June 16, 1994, Kristen was found dead in her Seattle apartment, only days before she planned to fly back to Buffalo and leave whole. The cause was ruled a heroin overdose, but to many, the scene felt contradictory. Her suitcase still lay open, her plane ticket unused, and in her notebook, the final lines trailed off unfinished. Those details made the tragedy even harder to comprehend. Kristen Pfaff died at just 27, carrying with her questions that no one has ever answered. Was she another victim of heroin's grip? Or of deeper private struggles that no one had the chance to understand? And if Kristen represents the unfinished diary pages, then Shannon Hoon, the voice of Blind Melon, stands as the image of a rising star, leaving behind a newborn child and whispers about a private life no one ever fully knew. Shannon Hoon, a shooting star gone too soon, leaving behind an infant and rumors. Shannon Hoon became known around the world through a song that seemed harmless. Enough, No Rain. The music video, with the little bee-girl dancing, lifted Blind Melon to the top in the early 1990s. Yet behind that radiant moment, Shannon lived a life shadowed by darkness, experiments, and rumors that were never confirmed. Born in 1967 in Indiana, Shannon stood out early with his unusual looks and free-spirited personality. He moved to Los Angeles, befriended Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses, and even sang backing vocals on Don't Cry before quickly forming Blind Melon. With a voice that was raspy yet sweet, Shannon helped turn the band into a phenomenon with just their debut album. But at the very same time, he was sinking deeper into drugs. Offstage, Shannon was hard to pin down. Some friends said he had shadowed romances with both men and women. Years later, on social media, fans still debated over photos and party stories where Shannon seemed comfortable showing affection toward male colleagues. Though he never publicly admitted anything, that image left him as one of grunge's most speculated figures when it came to sexuality. Tragedy struck on October 21st, 1995, while Blind Melon was touring. Shannon was found dead of a cocaine overdose on the band's tour bus. He was only 28 years old. The heartbreak was compounded by the fact that he had just welcomed a newborn daughter, not yet 3 months old. His death shattered Blind Melon and left behind a question that no one could answer. Who was Shannon Hoon beyond the stage lights? If Shannon carried with him the mystery of a dream cut short, Mark Lanegan, his peer from the same era, chose instead to lay everything bare in his memoir, where nights of sex and darkness were written down without restraint. Mark Lanegan, a memoir that exposed darkness and nights without limits. In the grunge world, Mark Lanegan never burned as brightly as Kurt Cobain or Chris Cornell, but his gravelly baritone voice made him unforgettable. With Screaming Trees, and later through collaborations with Queens of the Stone Age, Lanegan became the underground voice of Seattle. What stunned the public, however, were the revelations in his memoir, Sing Backwards and Weep, a book that laid his private life and sexuality bare. Born in 1964 in Washington, Mark grew up in a small town where addiction and violence took hold early. Music saved him from prison, but it also bound him to a community where heroin was almost a religion. On stage, Lanegan stood motionless, eyes half closed, letting his dark voice carry the weight. But off stage, his life was a blur of drug deals, violence, and nights spiraling out of control. In his memoir, Lanegan admitted bluntly that he had sex with anyone in exchange for drugs. There were nights, he confessed, when he could not even remember if he was with a man or a woman. Those words shocked readers and sparked debate. Was Lanegan simply a victim of addiction, or did he truly live as a bisexual man who never defined himself? He never labeled it, but his raw honesty made him one of the rare grunge figures to openly describe a sexuality without limits. Mark Lanegan died in 2022 at the age of 57 after years of illness. He left behind an expansive body of music and a memoir that readers found impossible to put down. Yet within that honesty lingers an open question. Was Lanegan confessing to unburden himself, or was he revealing only one piece of a truth the public was never ready to hear? And while Lanegan chose to write everything down, Jonathan Melvoin, the keyboardist for the Smashing Pumpkins, left this world in silence, his private life reduced to whispers after his sudden death in 1996. Jonathan Melvoin, the sudden death, and the secrets buried with him. Jonathan Melvoin may not be a name often mentioned when people talk about grunge, but his death in 1996 sent shockwaves through the music world. Born into an artistic family, his sisters, Wendy and Susanna, had both played with Prince. Jonathan grew up surrounded by music. That same connection eventually brought him to the Smashing Pumpkins, a band that stood at the crossroads of alternative rock and the grunge movement. On stage, Jonathan was the consummate professional. He stayed in the background, yet his playing helped shape the sound of the Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness tour. But away from the stage, he was a more complicated figure. Some former colleagues whispered that Jonathan had a difficult-to-define private life, with rumored relationships involving men. The speculation was never confirmed, but it circulated among musicians, adding a layer of mystery to a man who otherwise kept so much of himself hidden. Tragedy struck on July 12, 1996, when Jonathan was found dead of a heroin overdose in a New York hotel room. He was only 34 years old. Beside him lay Jimmy Chamberlin, the band's drummer, unconscious from the same drug, but still alive. Jonathan's sudden passing not only shook the band to its core, but it also opened a flood of questions. Why had such a talented musician chosen this path? And did his private life conceal more than the world ever knew? Jonathan Melvoin left no memoirs, no diaries. All that remains are rumors, unfinished music, and a question mark hanging over the man behind the keyboard. He may not have been one of grunge's brightest stars, but his death is a reminder that behind the music that once defined a generation, there were still lives lived in shadow, carrying secrets history has never answered.